True passion doesn't scream. It breaks down doors, changes facts, leaves other people's tickets to Mexico in their pockets. His answer was silent, graceful, deadly, and you're already holding it in your hands. Don't close the tab until you hear the gilding crack. The first cracks in my marriage appeared not with shouting or slammed doors, but with silence, the kind that thickens the air until even the hum of the refrigerator feels accusatory. Clara stopped leaving her paintbrushes in coffee mugs, stopped humming old folk songs while chopping vegetables, stopped tracing the scar on my forearm, the one I got fixing her bicycle chain on our third date. Her absence wasn't physical. She still slept beside me, still packed lunches with crisp apple slices and handwritten notes. But her eyes, once the color of stormlit whiskey, turned opaque, like frosted glass. I told myself it was the gallery job devouring her hours, the pressure of curating her first solo exhibition. Artists are mercurial, I reasoned. They orbit their work, not their husbands. Then came the Polaroids. I found them tucked inside a monograph on Frida Kahlo she'd borrowed from the library, 3 snapshots of Clara laughing on a park bench, head thrown back, sunlight pooling in the hollow of her throat. The man beside her was blurred, a smudge of denim and dark hair, his hand resting on her knee like it belonged there. My first thought wasn't anger but absurdity. She still uses film? Then the dates on the white margins registered March 12th, March 19th, April 2nd, days I'd worked late, days she'd claimed were spent scouting locations. The bench was familiar, too. The one near the bronze statue of Robert Frost at Willow Creek Park, 5 blocks from our apartment. I didn't confront her. Instead, I began mapping her absences. Tuesdays and Fridays, 3 to 6 p.m. The gallery was closed those afternoons. She'd return with flecks of dried clay on her sleeves, smelling of turpentine and something earthy, a moss maybe or rain-soaked soil. Once, a maple leaf clung to her scarf, crimson and veined like a human hand. I saved it, pressed it between pages 212 and 213 of her Kahlo book, where a passage about betrayal was underlined in charcoal. My hands grew steady in their new routine, inventorying discrepancies, cross-referencing timelines, dissecting her texts for double meanings. Need to finalize lighting with the team became code for meeting him. Running late, don't wait up transformed into a taunt. I memorized the rhythm of her lies, how her pupils dilated a fraction too long when she claimed the red wine stain on her collar was from a spilled Merlot at the gallery. Merlot. She hated red wine. The man had a name, of course. I learned it by following her to the park on a Tuesday, had pulled low, hands jammed into pockets. His name was Elias, a sculptor she'd met at a residency last fall. I Googled him later. 34 MFA from RISD, specializes in kinetic installations that interrogate the ephemerality of human connection. Pretentious, even for the art world. His studio was a converted warehouse near the docks, its windows streaked with salt and pigeon droppings. I circled it twice, noting the flickering neon exit sign, the dented fire escape, the way shadows pooled in the alley like spilled ink. Clara's laughter floated down from the 3rd floor, bright and unfamiliar. I waited until they left, Elias locking up, Clara adjusting his scarf with a tenderness she hadn't shown me in months, then picked the rusted padlock with a hairpin. Inside, the space reeked of welding fumes and beeswax. His work dominated the room. Twisted metal mobiles dangling from the ceiling, their edges sharp enough to draw blood. But it was the corner behind the kiln that undid me. A folding cot with rumpled gray sheets, a chipped mug labeled Elias in childlike script, and on the wall a series of sketches. Clara, nude, her body rendered in smudged graphite. Clara, asleep, one arm flung above her head. Clara, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since our honeymoon in Maine, when we'd gotten lost hiking and stumbled upon a hidden waterfall. I took nothing, left nothing. But as I relocked the door, a plan crystallized, cold and precise as a scalpel. The plan required patience, a virtue I'd never possessed until Clara's absences carved it into me. I began rising before dawn, cycling to the docks to watch Elias's studio. The cold seeped through my gloves as I perched on a fire escape across the street, binoculars trained on the third-floor windows. His routine was erratic. Some days he arrived with takeout coffees, others he stumbled in past midnight reeking of gin. But every Tuesday and Friday, at 2:47 p.m., Clara's figure would materialize beneath the flickering neon sign, her burgundy coat a wound against the warehouse's gray facade. She'd pause, glance over her shoulder, then vanish inside. I timed it. 17 seconds from street to stairwell. I cataloged their rituals. Elias kept the windows cracked, even in the cold, and on still afternoons, fragments of their conversations drifted out. Muffled laughter, the clink of whiskey glasses, the occasional thud of clay hitting the floor. Once, a skein of smoke curled from the window, carrying the acrid sweetness of burnt sage. Clara believed in cleansing spaces, in chasing away stagnant energy. I wondered what she told him about our apartment, our bed. The studio wasn't their only meeting place. On Sundays, they visited the Modernist Art Museum, always entering separately. Clara would linger by the Rothko Chapel replica, pretending to study the brushstrokes, while Elias circled like a shark, eventually bumping into her with theatrical surprise. I documented it all. The way his fingers grazed her lower back in the sculpture garden, the shared smirk over espresso in the cafe, the folded napkin he slipped into her coat pocket, a sketch perhaps or a room key. My revenge took shape in the basement, amid boxes of our old belongings. Clara's first pottery wheel gathered dust there along with kiln molds from her college days. I spent nights reconstructing her early work, a lopsided mug she'd gifted me, a vase glazed the exact blue of Lake Tahoe where we'd scattered her father's ashes. Using her tools felt like forgery, but necessary. The final piece was smaller, a hollow cube of white clay. Inside, I sealed the maple leaf from her scarf, a lock of her hair snipped while she slept, and a USB drive containing every photo, timestamp, and GPS coordinate of their affair. The gallery opening arrived, Clara's exhibition, Erosion and Renewal. She'd stopped mentioning it weeks ago, but the invitation arrived anyway, embossed and impersonal. I wore the suit she'd tailored for our anniversary, the wool scratching like a reproach. The space was all sharp angles and clinical lighting, guests sipping champagne as they drifted between installations. Clara's work dominated the center. Fractured ceramic spheres suspended on steel wires, each crack filled with gold resin. Kintsugi, the placard read, "Beauty in Brokenness." Elias stood near the entrance, sculpting air with his hands as he explained a twisted metal mobile to a collector. His eyes found Clara across the room, a current passing between them. She stood by her largest piece, a towering vase split diagonally, its shards glued with gold. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped, revealing something feral beneath. Then she turned, adjusting the vase's spotlight with exaggerated focus. The cube was already in place. 3 days prior, I'd posed as a deliverman, wheeling a crate labeled Sculpture Tools, fragile into the gallery's storage room. Security cameras had been easy to disable. Clara's passwords were still our cat's name followed by 0429, the date we'd adopted him. Now, as a waiter passed with oysters, I slipped into the back hallway. The storage room hummed with the scent of sawdust and anticipation. I unwrapped the cube, nestling it among Clara's backup pieces. It matched her aesthetic perfectly. Austere, fragile, a blank slate for projection. Tomorrow, when the curator discovered it, she'd assume it was an undocumented work. They'd X-ray it for authenticity, find the secrets inside, and the scandal would unravel them both. Back in the gallery, Elias was reciting Rilke to a brunette in a sequin dress. Clara hovered near the exit, phone pressed to her ear. I almost missed it, the tremor in her hand, the way her thumb swiped left, deleting a message. Later, I'd checked the tracker planted in her purse. Later, I'd learned she'd texted Elias not here. Too risky. But in that moment, I stepped into the spotlight meant for her shattered vase. The heat prickled my neck as I reached out, brushing a finger along the gold-filled crack. The resin gave slightly, still curing. One push, and the whole structure would collapse. I didn't. Retreating to the shadows, I watched her laugh at Elias's joke, watched him pocket her wineglass when she wasn't looking. The cube would be enough. Let the truth cut her publicly, surgically. Let the gold in her cracks turn to lead. The gallery staff discovered the cube 2 days later, as I knew they would. A junior curator emailed Clara asking about the unlisted piece. Polite, perplexed. She replied instantly, denying its origin, but by then the X-ray scans had already revealed the contents. The USB drive leaked within hours. A meticulously labeled timeline of her lies, GPS coordinates, mapping her detours to Elias's studio, photos of the park bench where they'd carved their initials beneath Robert Frost's bronze shoe. The maple leaf, brittle and blood red, became Exhibit A in the court of public opinion. I watched the collapse from a borrowed apartment 3 blocks east, curtains drawn, laptop glowing like a confessional. News outlets spun the story as a feminist parable gone wrong, the rising artist who'd weaponized intimacy, the sculptor exposed as a predator. Clara's kintsugi vases, once praised for their resilience, were recast as metaphors for systemic rot. Collectors rescinded offers. The gallery scrubbed her name from future exhibitions. Elias fled to Mexico, leaving behind a studio raided by tabloid photographers. They published close-ups of the cot, the sketches that chipped Elias mug. Clara didn't come home. She rented a loft above a bodega, its windows papered with rejection letters. I tracked her movements through the GPS, still pulsing in her purse. Most days, she wandered the museum district, lingering at the Rothko Chapel replica. Once, she hurled a rock at Elias's studio door, the sound echoing through my headphones as the hidden microphone transmitted her scream. Wordless animal, I expected catharsis. Instead, the silence deepened, a void where rage had lived. Nights, I'd stand in our old kitchen, tracing the ghostly outline of her paintbrushes on the counter. The suit I'd worn to the gallery hung in the closet, reeking of resin and sweat. On the first frost of November, I returned to Willow Creek Park. The bench where she'd laughed with Elias was vacant. Its wood slick with ice. Robert Frost's statue wore a crown of icicles, his bronze eyes fixed on the frozen pond. In my pocket, I carried the last relic. A shard from her fallen vase, its edge still sharp enough to draw blood. The pond had swallowed her father's ashes years ago. We'd stood here, Clara's hands trembling as she tipped the urn, whispering, "He loved this place." Now, I knelt at the water's edge and pressed the ceramic shard into the ice. It resisted, then cracked with a sound like bone snapping. The shard sank, trailing bubbles, until it settled among the silt and beer cans and lost wedding bands. Her loft went dark the following week. The GPS signal vanished, she'd found the tracker or discarded the purse. I didn't search. Let her disappear. Let her reinvent herself in some coastal town, molding clay into faceless figures. The cube, meanwhile, became an underground sensation. A guerrilla art collective claimed credit, hailing it as a critique of matrimonial performativity. They displayed it in a pop-up gallery, spotlit like a holy relic. Visitors debated its meaning. Was the maple leaf a symbol of transience? The hair a relic of intimacy? No one noticed the USB's final file. A single audio clip of Clara singing off-key in the shower, recorded years ago on a morning when love felt infinite. I sold our apartment, packed her remaining brushes into a crate labeled fragile, though nothing inside could break anymore. The movers left it in the basement of a storage unit, next to Christmas decorations and a box of unsent letters. Last week, I visited the pop-up exhibit. The cube sat under glass, its white surface smudged with fingerprints. A placard invited viewers to project their narratives onto the void. I stood there, waiting for fury or grief to rise. But all I felt was the weight of the shard in my coat pocket, smooth now from weeks of turning it between my fingers. Outside, snow fell in gauzy sheets, erasing footprints. I walked until the gallery lights blurred into the dusk, the cube's secrets buried under fresh white. One story may be ending, but the excitement never stops. Don't wait. Jump right into the next one and keep the thrill alive.